Hello, everyone. That was Ezra Furman, good friend, genius, rock star. Okay. First of all, I want to just check that everything's working. I'm on my new computer. Everybody hear me? Everybody see me? Is the quality of even a little better maybe than usual of the visual? I hope so. Maybe not. I'm not seeing any nods. But it's good on my end, and I want to thank ICAR for getting me a new computer, and I want to thank all of you who support ICAR. You're here creating the possibility for this whole community. So thank you for that, and we'll always appreciate your support for this work that we're doing together. Okay, so let's, in gratitude for that and for God who makes it all possible, let's say a blessing over our Torah study today. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, let's see. Okay, let me just say what we're talking about today, and then I want to just say a few words about how we talk. Today, we've been in a series in this class at the end of the first sixth of the Mishna, first order of the Mishna. We are in Tractate Bikurim, the discussion of the bringing of the first fruits. I'll remind you briefly again what that looks like. But we're in a series that I called Inclusion and Exclusion in Jewish Ritual. And we've been analyzing that, and so have the rabbis in the last tractate, because there are two parts to this mitzvah, and one of them is ritual, just ritual. That is, one of them is action. You bring the first fruit up to the temple in Jerusalem, and the other part is ritual. You recite something, and we started talking about inclusion and exclusion because so the Mishnah starts by saying, well, some people do this part of it, and some people do both parts of it, and some people don't do either parts. And we got into lots of conversations very quickly about who is being included in all parts of the ritual, who's being excluded from some parts of the ritual. What does that mean? And how does that force us to consider the various categories of exclusion, and how generally that affects every individual. Arlene, I think you keep going unmute. Would you mute? How that affects every individual in the community. Okay, today we're going to we're getting to we talked initially about property and how having property might grant you access to certain rituals. We talked last week about converts to Judaism and what their status is in the community, and how that status is negotiated, and how that affects them. And this week we're going to talk about gender roles, which obviously is just a huge topic in our contemporary conversation, cultural conversation, ethical conversation. And we're going to focus today in particular on, and it's important to say at the outside that Jewish rabbinic tradition has 4 gender identities, at least 4 primary gender identities. And we're going to look at one of them today, and it's called androgynous. Androgynous. That comes from the Greek, of course, which is andro and gynous, male and female, right? And we use the term, sometimes we've come to use it as to mean like ambiguous, not clear, like androgynous, not clear what gender this individual is displaying, and that's because it's like blurry between the male and the female. But actually, I think the rabbinic usage is truer to the Greek, which is andro and gynous, just displaying male and female characteristics, and their appraisal, as a lot of our society's appraisal is biological, right? Like seeming to have male and female traits, but as you'll soon see, then from the biological, they move to the social, as we do in our society. And okay, so we'll get into that. We'll explain all the 4 categories in a bit. I do want to say, I want to just acknowledge that what we're talking about then today is something that is not part of why we're talking about it is to move out of our cultural paradigm, but it is something that very directly speaks to an important cultural conversation that we're having, and one that is not an easy one to have, both because we don't always know, we don't have enough knowledge, but also because individual people and their experiences are affected by that. And I want to just acknowledge that I am someone who hasn't struggled a lot with his gender identity. And I have fit pretty neatly into one of the normative categories in our society. For a long time, I think it's safe to say there were only two normative categories in our society. Where we're at now, we could talk about. So that means I don't have a full understanding of even what it would mean to live in that experience. And I just want to acknowledge that and to say that I just want to say that therefore you kind of have to I hope that I have enough of your trust that you can trust me to lead this conversation, even without that knowledge, even without that experience. And if you trust me, it is, hopefully I've earned some of that trust, but also because if I deserve that trust, it's because I am not here trying to make you think anything. I'm not trying to assert my position or my wisdom or my expertise, right? I have some expertise in the text, but even there, I'm not necessarily right about how to read the text, okay? My job in these sessions is to frame our conversation. I work with the understanding that we're all interested in knowing, in reading Jewish text and in searching through it and in using that as a medium to have a conversation. What is that conversation about? It's about a search for wisdom. We're in a tradition that seeks wisdom. Right? As Job said, wisdom, where can it be found? Right? Our sages were referred to as chachamim, people who had wisdom. Does that mean that they are always right? No. Part of what they believed is that you had to question everything, even the received tradition, in order to discover wisdom. So we're on a journey for wisdom, and I think that's an important journey to be on, and it requires all of us to have like an open mind and humility, and that includes me. Okay, so that I want to say all that about the project that I think we're always engaged in Torah study, and then I also want to say that if there are people here who have wisdom, who have maybe particular wisdom gained from life experience around some of these topics, then I want to especially invite those voices to the front of our conversation. Okay, so let's begin. I'll just send you the source sheet. Emma, could you put that? Emma Wergeles is working the machine today, and we're very grateful to her. Thank you. Would you put the source sheet in the chat? Oh, do you not have it? Maybe I have it. There it is. Okay, great. So, okay, so let's take a look at we touched on this in the last class. I'm going to screen share now, but we're moving through these categories of people who cannot do either aspect of Bikurim, people who can do the physical, like bringing of the first fruit, but not reciting the formula. And now we're continuing to do that work. And here is a last list. This is the last Mishna in Mishna Bikurim. By the way, I'm hearing a lot of unmuting today. So just like we can all hear it, so it just ends up being a distraction. Please try to monitor your mute button and only unmute when we get into our larger conversation, please. Okay. If you will recall, the place that we have been, I'll just say briefly, is that one of the ways that someone would be excluded from Bikurim was not to have any land, because you have to, when you bring Bikurim, you're bringing it from your land. That's what the Torah says. So it seems you cannot bring Bikurim unless you have land. But even if you have land, if you were not, if it's not ancestral land, meaning you cannot say my father owned this land going back to the original allotment that God gave to Moses in the Torah, then you couldn't fairly, this is what the rabbis kept saying, you could not fairly recite the text of something like this, which you, Eternal One, have given to me, right? Because that didn't happen. And we talked a lot about, is this just a technical formulation? The rabbis are really hyper concerned about you uttering the right phrasing, or do they have other concerns? We've spent some time processing that, but here is a last list of, and I don't mean to say that offhandedly, do they have other concerns? Meaning, do they have very well-established patterns of who is fully involved in public life and who is at the margins of public life or excluded from it? Okay, I'll just speak it out. Here are some categories of people who might be bringing first fruits, but they are told not to recite the formula. Okay, and here they are. Let's see if I can highlight it. A guardian, meaning someone who is bringing first fruits on behalf of their charge. Someone maybe like a minor who is not yet old enough to inherit the land. So the guardian is bringing their first fruits, but they don't recite the formula because they're not they're not able to say this is my land. An agent. Okay, similarly, if you had your lawyer do it on your behalf, your lawyer would not recite the formula because your lawyer could not say, hereby, which you, Eternal One, have given to me. A slave, and there was slavery in ancient Israel, and this, I think, probably refers to a Hebrew slave, which was a kind of indentured servant who would serve for 6 years. That person would not be able, as again an agent of yours, to recite the formula, though they could bring it. Okay, and now these people also don't recite, although for different reasons, because the preceding three people did not own land, but these people do, and these are some of the these are 3 of the 4 major gender categories in rabbinic literature: a woman, a tumtum, or an androgynous. Okay. A woman, a tumtum, or an androgynous. Here's the word tumtum in Hebrew, and here's the word androgynous. Okay. Now, I'm just going to speak out the technicalities, and soon we will be in our discussion. We're going to be focusing on the androgynous today, but the technicalities here are that a woman was not one of the inheritors of the land in the original parceling of the land of Israel. Benot Tzlofchad is like a kind of a story about that, but with an asterisk there. Generally speaking, patriarchs inherited, and so a woman can own land. A woman can inherit land. That's what Benot Tzlofchad were saying, but they don't say that formula. Now, okay, we can talk a lot about whether or not that makes any sense to us and what ethic is behind that, and whether or not it is deeply unjust or slightly unjust or contextually unjust. But we're not going to focus on that one today, but we should know that it's in the larger conversation. A tumtum or an androgynous apparently is in the same status. They were not like the men were originally the inheritors of the land in the first parceling. And then, so neither a woman nor these 2 other categories. Now, what are these 2 other categories? And I'm just going to give you the basic definition, and we're going to be talking about the social definition or how they might have been perceived in society. Some of it will be speculative, and some of it will be drawn from the Mishnah. But a tumtum, I already said that what an androgynous was, which is someone displaying both male and female simanim, signs. That's the word in Hebrew. So physical signs, probably traits, but that's the word that is used, signs, right? Okay. And a tumtum, meanwhile, is someone who is not, it's actually closer to the way that we in English casually use the word androgynous, which is a tumtum is someone who is not displaying, it's not clear what signs they're displaying. In other words, it is occluded. And this word tumtum, metamtem, is to hide something, to cover it over. So if we were speaking just biologically, if we were just speaking of signs of puberty or gender or sex, we would say, oh, there's, imagine skin covering those signs and we can't see what it is, right? Okay, as opposed to an androgynous who is clearly displaying both male and female sex traits. Okay, let's just stop there. Okay, let's stop there. Any questions so far? And then I want to set up the chapter that we're going to look at. Yes, Yael.
I thought the tumtum was from metumtam, meaning intellectually disabled.
No, not in this case. It's
okay.
covered over, and it has nothing to do with intellect. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay. All right. Now here's where things get interesting. The last chapter, Bikurim, Mishnah Bikurim is 4 chapters long. The last chapter of Mishnah Bikurim, like we sort of mentioned this in passing, and we've been in this discussion of who recites and who doesn't, and who's in and who's out because of the land that they own. We sort of understand the logic of this Mishnah, though they haven't fully explained to us what an androgynous is, or a tumtum is, but the Gemara goes on to do that, the Talmud. But there are 4 chapters in Mishnah Bikurim, and the last chapter then of our whole order that we've been studying since we started this class is devoted entirely to the androgynous. Entirely to the androgynous. It's just it's as if call back to this Mishnah that we just learned. Let's talk about that some more. Let's figure that out some more. And, right, even more interesting, it's that chapter is not a part of the original Mishnah. It's not a part of the original Mishnah, at least most people think so. It is a collection of braitot, which means it's as old as the original Mishnah, but it's a collection of parallel discussions that were happening among the rabbis that were not codified into the Mishnah, but they existed, and the rabbis were kind of talking about it. And at a certain point in the printing of the Talmud, right, or most people think, at a certain point there was a decision to attach this chapter to the Mishnah. That's a big thing to do. Imagine like one more book of the Torah, attach this chapter to the Mishnah. And because it is a kind of informal or addition, it's there are many variations, many nuschaot, girsaot. There's lots of different additions, and so the material we're going to see is going to it's just one. I kind of used what was on Sefaria and took it, and I thought I would just stay with that, which is the Talmud's version. There are other versions that have been found. But then some of the Talmud's versions doesn't make sense. There are contradictory and typo. So this is also, I must say, not only is it not, do I not feel that this is ever like the official statement on, this is really not the official statement on it. It's a collection of teachings organized around an investigation into what the social status of a person is who has the I guess so far physical status of being an androgynous, or at least physically determined, socially assigned status of being and androgynous, displaying male and female simanim. Okay, so take a look. What we're going to be doing, well, I don't want to speak out more before you see the next Mishnah, because the next Mishnah will sort of say it all. Okay. The androgynous is in some ways like men and in other ways like women. In other ways, they are like men and women, and in others, they are like neither men nor women. Okay? So that's how the Mishnah is going to be organized. The androgynous is like men in some ways, like women in some ways, like both men and women in some ways, like neither in some ways. Okay? And we're going to move through those and try to make sense of, well, what are these ways that the rabbis are imagining or assigning or observing, right? And we're going to ask, like, what do we learn about this society and its thinking around gender roles and identities? Again, I'm hearing some feedback noise, so please mute. There's a lot of unmuting today, and we can all hear it, and it's distracting. Looking for it now because I can.
Barry, please mute yourself.
Thanks. Okay. All right. Let's take a look. Wait, let me just stop there again. I just want to keep checking because I've been doing a lot of the talking. Any other questions or concerns before we move forward? Or just notice it, whoa, like I'm surprised by that assignment of categories or that way of moving into the, okay. I don't need anything yet from you, but I want to open that space. Okay, so let's move forward then. Here we go. In what ways, and I have an is here because I struggled a lot with the pronouns here, I have to say. The pronoun that is used throughout the Mishnah, and this is important, is the male singular pronoun. So you would say he all the way through, and that is the translation I received. The androgynous, he is this, he is that, he is this. It's, I think, a consequence in some ways of just the Hebrew default. And I think just like I don't think the Torah means God is male every time it defaults to the male pronoun, so too I don't think that's meant here. But it also gets, I don't think it's a useful pronoun in this case. It gets confusing because the androgynous is supposed to, the whole point is not fit into the male category. So he starts making it feel too male. And then, so I used they, and I don't want to necessarily use it in the way that has become more and more common to use it in our society as a singular, but I am just assuming we're talking about because after all, we're talking about men and women, so we're talking about androgynusim, let's say, them, okay? So I'm just gonna use that pronoun for our discussion. In what ways are they like men? Well, here are some of the ways. They cause impurity with white discharge, meaning they can become impure for temple purposes through ejaculation or through some kind of emission, venereal disease, etc. Okay? Like men, if they have some kind of male sexual emission, or not sexual, but disease, genital emission is the right word, then they can cause impurity like a man can. They are bound by yibum like men. Meaning, yibum is, there's like another word we don't understand in English, the levirate marriage, but it means if you are a son in a family and one of your brothers dies without having kids, your obligation is to take on his wife and have kids with his wife and provide for her. As a way of continuing your brother's name and line. The androgynous is also obligated to do that. If an androgynous has a brother who dies without children, then the androgynous is obligated to marry, to take on that brother's wife and provide for her, and I suppose have children with her if that is possible. Okay, they dress, see, I was editing the gender here. They dress and cut their hair like men. Okay, now that's clearly a social assignment, but it also can be an observation. And the androgynous tends to dress and cut their, short hair, long hair, whatever the style was then. They marry, but are not married like men, meaning the way that ancient Israelite marriage worked is that a man took a wife, right? Acquired a wife. So that is true for the androgynous. The androgynous can acquire a wife, and they cannot be acquired as a wife. So in that way, functionally, they have the same, as it says, like men, they are operating in the same way in this social institution that men do. And they are obligated in all the commandments spoken of in the Torah like men. Now that seems like, whoa, that was a big one. And all the commandments spoken of in the Torah. Wow, but that is as opposed to women who are obligated in most of the commandments of the Torah, but not the positive time-bound commandments, right? That's a discussion we've had in this class before, meaning if the commandment has to be done at a certain time of day or year, a woman is not obligated to it. And we have a perfect example, which is Bikurim, right? The bringing of the first fruits happens in a rhythm of the year, and the Torah says all of your males should go up and present this. Okay. So maybe let's start without, we're going to be thinking about the role of the androgynous, but we don't actually know much about the androgynous yet. What we have been told about is what it is to be male in this society, or what it is to be a man in this society. So what does it mean to be male in this society? What are the things that we saw? What are the definitions or some of them? Remember, there's a longer list that I could have added, and some didn't textually make sense to me, and some were just too complicated. But these are some of the definitions of what it means to operate as a male in this society. Jen?
Well, I think this is a little meta to that, but I think it leads into that. And that's really important to note, that these passages are prescriptive. They're not about how somebody wants to express their own intersex experience. And I think that's really important, because it's a broader social thing where our gender expression is dictated to us by our genital presentation, as opposed to what we're moving toward now, which is a lot more of like having the freedom to choose how you live that out and how you live out your own experience of your body, regardless of your genitals. So yeah. I just really think that's an important thing to note at this stage of how they're developing this.
Yes, I think that is correct. And I also think I would just add to that it brings us to think about the ways that this society presumes that it can dictate to you, which are sometimes similar to our own society and sometimes different. There are many things that this society feels like it can and ought to dictate to you that we don't imagine dictating to in our own society. So it brings up all questions of obligation and prescription, as you're putting it, Chen. Thank you. Yonatan. I'm not hearing you.
To Jen's, one of the things that you won't find in the Talmud is a definition of who gets to decide that you are a man, or you are a woman, or you are an androgynous, or you are a tumtum, or a saris or ilonit. There is no arbitrating authority. And a lot of these statements regarding biology, if you read them as prescriptive, then they don't even work for men, right? Because like not every man, for example, or for women, not every man, cisgendered man, become ritualistically impure through the course of his life by some kind of emission, right? Necessarily. That's not necessarily true. So this refers to a case in which that may happen to an androgynous. My position is, and I've never seen anything in Talmud to contradict this, anything before the medieval commentators, that all of the Talmudic sources allow a person to define their own gender. And it's true that they create distinctions, and that there is some correlation between gender and sex, but I don't think that gender is inherent, that correlation is inherent or insurmountable.
Okay. I don't know if anyone else, maybe it might be my internet, but there were little stop pauses in what you said, but I got most, I think, of what you said. And yeah, I'll leave it there. Okay, these are very helpful introductory comments. And I will say something in response to what you just said, Yonatan, which is that I think as you speak it out, you're talking about, you're referencing something important, which is who decides, who is the arbitrator. And I think it must be said that the rabbis saw themselves as the deciders. And whether, and I think they thought that was good and right. And whether they did a good job of it, but I think they saw themselves as, the way the rabbis often function in communities today. I am the holder of the knowledge of this tradition. Come and I will help you determine things, right? Like rabbis functioning like scholars or lawyers, right? So, I think there's a presumed decider in the fact of the conversation. What do you think of that, Yonatan?
Well, it's hard to know, and I think certainly by the time we get to the Middle Ages, that what you're saying is true, and that's, I think, the burden we all carry with us, is that we read this through a lens that's passed through so many generations. But my reading actually is that our religion used to have a much better position on these issues 2,000 years ago. That's my honest reading of the.
Yes, and look, again, you're freezing for me, and for anyone else. Yeah, So but I now I think I've got it, and I want to say that is so. That's you're putting that position on the floor, and I appreciate it, and I strongly resonate to it. If only in the fact that we're talking about an ancient society that had 4 normative, well-established gender categories, and that assignment might feel restrictive or wrong as we move through it, but it's already in some ways challenges are one of the things that is emerging from our current cultural conversation is a recognition that not only are we challenging our own gender norms, but we're not just challenging ones that have always existed, but that if we look around in different cultures and societies, we'll see other gender norms and categories. And guess what? In our tradition, in Judaism, in the thing that a fundamentalist will tell you is more legitimate than this society, modern society you live in today, there were at least four gender categories, and some of them were about people who did not fit neatly into the boxes of male or female. So that's just important. Whether they had a healthier or not, we can continue to discuss, but it's so important, I think, to recognize. Okay, do you want to continue to ask the question, though? What is a male in this society? What does a male do? What is a male up to? And I'll just put this up again, just so we can take a look at the things the male is up to. There's a physical element, right? They are bound to certain familial obligations as a male would. They can marry and marry in a male way, whatever that means. And men are obligated in all the commandments spoken of in the Torah, no matter what time it is. Men have to perform the commandments. So, what's that? What does it mean to be a man? And I don't feel yet at the point where I can say, and why is an androgynous like men in these ways? I don't understand that. So, anybody want to offer a formulation? If not, we can continue to move forward, because we'll take a look at the other list. Maybe we'll have a better sense of it after we see how they are like women in the rabbinic text. Okay, we want to do that? We want to hold off? Okay, let's hold off. Let's take a look here. And in what ways are they like women? They cause impurity with red discharge like women. Okay, so reference to menstruation, and like women, genital emissions that are associated with men. If androgynous has the same emission, that will cause impurity, and so too if they have emissions that are similar to the ones that are associated with women. They cannot be alone with men like women. Okay, these are sexual prescriptions, sexual caution prescriptions, sexual. Some worry that something sexual will happen between men and women, and perhaps some worry that women will be assaulted at the hands of men, so men cannot be left alone with women that they are not related to or married. This is called yichud. Same thing with an androgynous. An androgynous should not be left alone with a man that the androgynous is not related to, lest, I don't know, like, let's think about that. They do not transgress the prohibitions of do not round the corners of your head or destroy the corners of your beard. In other words, the androgynous can shave and pluck a facial hair and not worry about, there are commandments here that are physically related to the male physiological traits, like the growth of facial hair. And so men have to worry about those commandments. Women do not, and neither does an androgynous. And even if an androgynous was displaying facial hair, an androgynous could use a razor or take care of it in any way that a woman would. And they are invalidated from giving testimony like women. Women's testimony was not taken in court, except in certain circumstances. And they are ineligible for the priesthood, right? They can't serve in the temple either, right? And these last ones, of course, raise our common inquiry into the limitations assigned to women in ritual life, and we've been talking about those along the way as well. Okay, so now we have some kinds of, I don't think it's necessarily a definition of the male or of the female. In fact, it's very specifically described as a defining of the ways in which the androgynous shares with the men category, and the ways in which the androgynous shares with the woman category. So are we starting to get a sense of what role the androgynous is being assigned in this society, and why it might draw from both of these categories, and why? Anyone have theories or just observations on why? I'll start with one. It seems to me like if we read the sages as worrying about women being assaulted in contexts when they are alone with men, then it seems that the sages are also worried that an androgynous will be assaulted, right, sexually in that way. That seems to me, but that's an observation, a speculation. Okay, Ken.
It seems to me that when you look at the two categories and the characteristics, as I think you pointed out, you've got the physical characteristics and the social characteristics. So if we look at the physical characteristics in which the androgynous seems like a woman, we're really left with two. That is the red discharge, whatever that might be, and the facial hair, the presence of facial hair. And the others seem to me to be more, first of all, the cannot give testimony and ineligible for the priesthood, those are derivative of the decision if you are androgynous. So we can sort of remove them. The cannot be alone with men, or a male who is unrelated to him, then that's a socially defined relationship by presumably the rabbi, or maybe even the person, him herself. So it seems to me that the only obvious external to a society of the female's kind of characteristic would be the shaving. So
right, Ken. This is a helpful kind of parsing that you're doing for us, and which is to point out that some of these seem entirely socially constructed or religiously constructed, however you want to, label it. But I would say they are all socially constructed, right? Even the ones that are physical are a social response to a physical reality. The decision that these fluids cause impurity is a social or religious or divine decision, however you want to think about it. But it's not like, this isn't just identification. And this gets back to Yonatan's point. This isn't just like, these are the facts. This is like a kind of, these are the meaning, these are the consequences of the facts. And we could say, oh, well, this is a wise social response. An androgynous should not be held to the standard of not plucking or trimming their beard because they are likely to want a different social presentation. Or we could say, oh no, this is not a wise social response. Why should the androgynous cut their hair and dress like the men, right? I don't know, but this is all a kind of a social conversation. Okay, so Payam.
The rabbis are living in a binary world, and to them there's a fear of, what if it's a male or what if it's a female? We don't know which one of the two it is, so let's just be more restrictive. And if it happens to be a male, then what are the sins that can occur from that? So let's prescribe the discharge part. But what happens if it's a female? What's the worst sin that can be? If it's a female, let's prescribe X. So, I think they're trying to hedge both sides of the bet in essence. They're not really trying to create a third category. I don't know.
Yeah, that's helpful, Payam. Payam often takes a bit of a suspicious voice in our conversations, and it's an important one to hold here. And Payam reminds us that, 4 categories. The rabbis are so different. I've been saying that, the rabbis had a binary, and they were working with them on a binary, and they had normative categories. These aren't the normative categories, right? So and as Payam says, they're worried mostly about, well, I don't know, what do we do with this in the context of our thing, which is the mitzvot and the tradition and the society that we're trying to create. So I think that all is those are very important reminders, Payam. Appreciate that. Did I see another? Allison.
Hey, so I think Payam's point about how rabbis were living in the binary is really important and also interesting. And I think that seems to be I was rereading Bereshis this weekend, and I was really struck by the fact that the first 4 things that God does in creating the universe is to separate this from that. It's lightness and dark, earth and water, heaven and earth. These things, I think we're comfortable with a binary. And the rabbis are trying to take this observed reality, human variation, and they're trying to make it fit because everything's supposed to make sense. Everything is supposed to fit, right? And it says even twice, God created them, man and woman, which I think maybe was Lilith. And then, and then God puts Adam to sleep and makes from Adam another woman. But from the very beginning, it's all about binaries.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's very, very, very important. So important that you might say it gets to the very heart of our religion. What do we refer to God as? Echad. God is one. God is one, right? God is before. What are those look at the first 5 lines of the Torah. What does God start doing? Dividing day and night, dividing light and darkness. And there's a reason for that, because that is the way our minds work. One part of our mind is just analysis, categorization. We need it to function. Read Thinking Fast and Slow, right? That's just the way it works. But that's not the essence of things. Essence of things is unity. However, the rabbis they're analyzers. They're given binaries. They're trying to use their minds. They're using this power of binah, of discernment. And so even the rabbi, and part of what's so important about Allison's comments is that even the rabbis, in having 4 categories, the 4 categories are really just products of the 2 categories. It's 1 and 2, and 1 and 2, and neither 1 and 2, right? Binary thinking, analytical thinking, right? Okay. Let's see. I'm going to take Alexandra's comment, and then I want to move forward a little bit into the text. I want to make sure we see this important material that we see upcoming, and we only have 12 minutes left. Alexandra?
I'm not sure if my comment is totally fair because I think you can extend it in many different directions. But to me, it feels like I'm grateful, as Yonatan pointed out, that there are these multiple categories so long ago. And I think that's wonderful that was there. But at the same time, to me, the rabbis' expressions of these categories and definitions of these categories, to me, seem to fit more about preserving the religion and preserving the society than about an individual's protection or status within the society. For example, like to me, the Torah law about the brother taking on his brother's widow as his own wife is to preserve and protect the woman, so she's not alone in this world, in this patriarchal world where she needs a man to protect her. And by saying, okay, the androgynous person can and must marry his brother's widow, but can't testify in court, can't do this, can't do that, can't do this. How are they going to survive? And how is that protecting the brother's widow? And so just these categories to me just seem that they're more about preserving the society, preserving the religion, as opposed to like sanctifying the individual.
Yes, thank you. Yes, that I think is very well articulated and also an important part of our conversation. These sorts of social prescriptions are meant to create a certain kind of order and maybe impose a certain kind of order. When we critique them, sometimes we say it is the order of the powerful that the powerful want to maintain. But in any case, social kind of construction, prescription, social rules create are intended and maybe at their best to create an order that we need so that society will be orderly, right? There are some that we don't mind, like crosswalks seem like a good idea, but there are some which are there to create order, but end up not taking into account the minority because they work on kind of general or majority principles, right? And so we have to, that's part of how we analyze, we regard social rules and we question social rules to say, well, who is benefiting from them and who is being constricted by them? Do we need to rethink them, right? So you know, you could even read the rabbis like generously, as I usually do, and say they're trying to figure this out. They're not trying to hurt anyone, but they have a certain social order in their mind, and it's worrisome to them that that they can't account for everybody, and they're trying to figure out ways to account for people, right? But are they? Is it too easy for them to say you're in, you're out? I mean, that's been our major question through all these discussions. Who gets to say, and are they saying it with any with a full understanding of the consequences and of the meaning and of the impact? Okay, I want to show you now the third category, which is the category of the ways in which they are the androgynous is like both men and women. Okay. One who strikes them or curses him is liable, as in the case of men and women. But can I ask you a question? When I go like this, do you see Rich Text Editor 3? Does everybody see that? Yes? Okay, that's annoying. I don't want that to pop up. All right. One who unwittingly kills them must go into exile, and if on purpose, then receives the death penalty. Okay, as in the case of men and women. So someone who strikes them, curses them, or kills them is liable in all the same ways. They may eat of the holy things that are eaten outside of the temple, things that have been sanctified, kodshim. After you make an offering and part of it is eaten, but the ritual like foods that have sanctity, they may eat of those foods. And they may inherit any inheritance, as in the case of many men and women. And that's why we're here. They may inherit. They can own land and property and stuff and goods, and they can grow produce. And that is why, as can women, as can all the gender categories that we're looking at here. And that is why we're discussing the Mishna Bikurim. But there's also these sorts of holiness, ritual, sacred things they participate in, like men and women, and the ways in which their personhood, their body, cannot be assaulted, and maybe even their reputation cannot be assaulted, just like anyone else's personhood. Okay, so continuing fashioning of this category. Now I might ask the question, how are the rabbis talking about, this is an interesting one. What unites men and women and androgynous and tumtum? What is this category? What does it mean to just be a human in this society? All of the categories share, right? Matt, you've got a hand up. Do you want to speak to this or hold?
I was speaking more to what just happened. Yeah. Do you want me to hold?
Yeah, just hold for a sec. Anyone want to speak to this new category? Jonathan.
Oh, I just want to say there's also the thing about the Nazarite vow in there that's not in the translation.
Oh, I took that out. That's a very confused, yeah, we'll leave that aside. It's a very confusing one. It's like, if you take a Nazarite vow on the fact of like, this person, it's very confused. This person is neither, I attest that this person is neither a male nor a female, then yeah, it's confusing. Yeah, then you would have legitimately taken the Nazarite vow. It's a way of determining the accuracy of your statement. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it aside for now. All right, I want to turn back to Matt then.
Yeah, actually, Allison had spoken before and really sparked this in me. Yes, this is binary, but if I look at this, my natural thing, if I just look at Torah, is to say there's men, there's women, they're separate, that's holy, and anything else is wrong. That would be my natural, easy path. I separate out. I can have this cloth or that cloth, but if I mix them, it's bad. I can plant this or that, but if I mix, so my natural, easy way to handle androgynous is to say they're wrong, no rules, you're out. And so
if you're a rabbi,
if I'm a rabbi just looking at Torah back then, trying to make rules, my easiest path is to discard anything that crosses the boundary. So while they're being binary and they're not doing, they are in fact trying to make the rules work for what they see, rather than excluding that which doesn't fit.
Yeah. I'm not gonna say that. I'm not gonna like. I want to challenge that a little bit, but I'm not gonna say that's not a plausible reading of the Torah, that it has some inherent sense that like not only are men better than women, but that men and women are the only two like right categories, and everything else is wrong. But hold on.
It's the whole notion that's separate. That's my point. That separate is good.
Right. I hear you. I do hear you. But okay. First of all, I'm not sure. What I don't feel sure about is all of the value assignment. Is the Torah really saying that anything, like, does the Torah have this idea that these things are good, and the Torah puts that out as a value statement? I often say that the Torah is definitely patriarchal, but I don't think that it's misogynist. That I don't think you'll come across a hatred of women too often. No. But I mean, it's a parallel point, which is how much value is the Torah assigning here? And then when it comes to the rabbis, I think you may be right. They may be inheriting those value sensibilities. They also may be inheriting them from the cultures around them. Let's take in mind, they're using a Greek word, right? But at the same time, they may, I mean, they may be trying to find space, and in the very act of saying, wait a minute, not everything is male and female. I mean, let's just acknowledge that's an important acknowledgement that they're making. And so, yeah. So that has a meaning that is not necessarily about that. That is a meaning that is not necessarily about value assignment. Okay. Are we out of time here? Okay, we are almost out of time. So let me just and then I'll take whatever whoever has thoughts, and we'll just stay as long as we need to collect everybody's thoughts. But let me show you the last. We did the ways in which they like men, the ways in which they like women, the ways in which they are like both. Some question of like what it means to just what are the basic traits of a human individual in this society. And now we're going to have ways in which they are like neither. And there are a few examples that I'm just going to focus on one example. There are only a few in the Mishna, and as I said, they're conflicting ones. So we're just going to focus on one example. It is a problem, like it has its own set of problems because it's about how you value a human being financially, right? Now, this matters because there was a slave trade, right? So there were like a person could estimate their own kind of, a person could estimate someone else's worth in terms of purchasing the right to their labor. But also because you could, if you had slaves, you could not offer them to the temple, but offer their worth to the temple and pay their worth as a way of offering them to them. And you could do that for yourself. You could say, I hereby dedicate the value of my life to the temple. I give you 50 shekels for the value of my life, right? And it's especially problematic because men and women had different valuations. This is Leviticus chapter 27. So I want to talk about, I mean, I just said the Torah is not misogynist, but the Torah is sexist, right? Like that's a word I would use. Like there's a sex difference and one is lesser in some respect. It may just be the worth of labor, but yeah, we're talking about those issues now as well, right? So, okay, now the androgynous, and this is interestingly the category where the androgynous is neither like men nor like women. Take a look here. And in what are they? Sorry, are they different from both men and women? They cannot be evaluated as men and women are. Now, initially, that sounds to me like, oh, they have a different value. Men are 50 shekels, women are 30 shekels, androgynous, what, 40? It sounds like they have a different value. They are not evaluated at the same price. But remember, they're different from both men and women in that they cannot be evaluated. And I think actually the correct reading is you cannot set their value or their price in the market. And the reason I think that is because the Mishna here, remember the unofficial Mishna, and the whole tractate ends with this statement. And I just think this statement feels so important. And now we're coming to a close, but this is the last thing that we'll consider. And it really is worth considering what this means. As if picking up on the impossibility of valuing the androgynous, setting a financial price for the androgynous, Rabbi Yossi says, why do I have Rabbi Yossi? Rabbi Meir says, I think there actually were different girsaot about that, but maybe I just made a mistake. Rabbi Meir says, the androgynous is a unique creation, bria bifnei atzma, a creation to its own, and the sages could not decide about them. V'lo yachlu chachamim lahachriya alav. Could not decide about them. And decide here might mean determine or settle the issue. But they just say they could not decide about them. At the end of this tractate, the last statement is, we actually don't know. We're not sure. But this is not so with the tumtum, for sometimes one is a man and sometimes one is a woman. Now, I don't know what that means either. Does it mean, oh, well, this is more of a physical thing and we could just do the surgery and determine that the tumtum, oh, it turns out has male genitalia, or oh, turns out has female genitalia? Or is it saying something else like, A tumtum is a different category, which actually does lean to one or the other. Whereas an androgynous, it's indeterminate. We at least we're not able to determine. Now, I want to we're a little over time here, but I do want to take at least the hands that are up, offer folks a chance to speak as we finish. What do you think? What do you make of this? Where are we here when the sages end by saying, well, they fit in this category for man, this category, but like in the end, they cannot decide. Okay, Agnes?
Oh, I guess I'm trying to look at whether they cannot decide what the value would be or cannot decide whether they are, like I'm looking back at they can't, so which feels different from I'm looking at the, like.
Yeah, hold on. Lo kanashim, lo kanashim. Oh, you're right. If it was good to decide, yeah, you're right. Sorry, I didn't trade turns like that. But sages could not decide about them whether they were men or women. Yeah, go ahead, keep going. You're right. I missed that. You see, I am not the authority in even the reading itself.
Challenging me too, because I feel like the whole time hearing this, I'm like, it feels like this is about describing, like, to say yesh bo drachim is to say, like, there are certain things that you do when you're in this category and certain things you do in this category. Like, I just think that this is what I was trying to say in the chat, in our little exchange, Jen, like, I think we in our culture are very fixated on, like, well, is a trans woman a woman, or is a trans man a man? And I think that's not like a meaningful question to them. I think it's just like, it's not like, is an androgynous this or is an androgynous that? Is an androgynous, what does an androgynous do? What are the practices that are, and I just think that that's such a, I mean, I remember I went into one of the like Jewish bookstores a couple of years ago, and I was wearing high heels or something and a dress, and I remember being totally floored. I went in to buy a siddur, and the guy said, do you need a women's siddur? Like, he did not flinch, just sort of like there was something that's so lacking in anxiety about like ontology or being or who you are, that is just focused on what is your practice. And I think that there's that question of that last thing of Rabbi Yossi saying that, or Meir saying that they could not decide, like, what does it mean to be a man or a woman? What does it mean to have to have drachim becha that are ketzad? Yeah, I don't know. This is like my fumbling, but I'm.
No, well fumbled, because Agnes is taking us right back to some of the opening questions that we were asking, and questions that Jen was posing, that Yonatan was posing. Who is deciding here? And whoever's deciding is not the androgynous. It's not the androgynous. So part of what Agnes is saying here is, yeah, even in the attempt to sort of, well, is it men or women? Men or women? Which one is it? And we can't decide, right? That's a very different question than we are unable to determine like, it's a parallel question, but it's actually quite different, because you might have looked at the whole thing differently, which is, say, androgynous, what is your practice? How do you, we're not able to put you in one of our categories. How would you define your category? How do you want to dress? Who will you marry? Right? Which rituals will you participate in? This sort of rethinking, I think, is pretty fundamental to the kind of conversation we're having in our own society today. And were the rabbis having that? No, probably not that formulation, but they were having their own movement towards asking these questions, right? And looking at them in their search for wisdom, I think, is what we do to kind of, provoke and help us reconsider in our search for wisdom. Okay, I said I was going to take the hands that are up. Rosa Berkowitz.
Okay, so I think that the rabbis were being much more simplistic than we are in this analysis. I think they were looking at a group of people that were androgynous, and they were trying to fit them into wherever I believe that the people themselves, the androgynous person themselves, wanted to fit into. I don't really think they took the whole broader picture that we look at today.
Mm.
As I said, to me, it's a very narrow category that they were looking at.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there is one read of this that the rabbis are not as intensely prescribing, and a lot of this is important, I think, because it's also a read of the Mishnah. Maybe the rabbis are just reporting, like, this is the way it works. Like, here are some features of our social norms. This is the way that it, and maybe that's partially is informed by the androgynous. Like, I think that is also, let's hold that reading out there. Arlene? Arlene, you're all over
okay,
the holding the bridge.
Okay, yeah.
Hi.
Yeah, I just have a few questions that just pop up, because if the androgynous don't have any value, it's like, to me, what happens to them? To me, it's almost like it's not inclusive. They can be outcast in their religious practice, and if they get married, so they're not really living up to their potential, I don't think. And their service to God, and people dictating, and so that to me is really disturbing. And are there any other questions later on, like with the Mishna and the Talmud, about the androgynous, like about this decision initially? How does it affect people, or not? Is this the only place for it, or?
Yeah, no, there are other places in the Talmud, although I don't think we ever get to the question that you're asking, which is an important one. I mean, and that's really why we're having this conversation all together, right? I think that the heart of our investigation is a concern that people, when people are excluded or included from ritual life and social life, it's not just a curious thing how we manage to make order of our society. It affects individuals' experience, individuals' selfhood experience, me. Think about what do you want to be included in? What do you want to be a part of in this society, right? So what if you just can't? That experience is fundamental to the investigation that we're doing here. Or we are wondering about exactly that. And you're right, I don't hear that strongly here, right? We could see where concerns like that might exist in Jewish tradition, but they ain't here. Okay, we're running late, but I'll just give it just a few more minutes. So let's try to keep our comments relatively tight. Matt? No?
No, my hand was still up. No,
Jen?
I was lowering it.
I couldn't tell if you said my name or not, sorry.
Yes, Jen, sorry.
Okay, all right. I just want to speak to really briefly how it feels to have this conversation, because I see this popping up like when we talked about disability too. And as a person who's non-binary and also a gender therapist, so I spend all my day with people who are not in this discourse, right? In the sense that they are not rabbis and they are not making those decisions. And the way that this can be talked about so abstractly is harmful. And I don't know if it was, and I'm not saying we're doing that. I actually really appreciate that people are coming in here with their lived experiences or asking about the lived experiences of the people being referred to there. But it's one of the ways that I really struggle with rabbinic literature, is how abstract it gets and how separate from individual. And I think Agnes is right that that's partially because that's not what they're interested in. But I wonder how we marry our own interest in individual experience and our individual experiences with talking about this rabbinic literature. And that just seems to be such a tension to me.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. I think you're right. I think that it's like, that's the famous thing is, pill pool. What is pill pool? Right? They have it's a word that gets used in English. It's, the rabbis engaging in Talmudic abstractions, abstracting out. And there is something really dangerous about that. There is something really dangerous about that. And I also think that there potentially is something, at least culturally, historically male about that, right? That's the analytical Kantian tradition, to reduce something to an idea. And there's great value in doing that. There's some exercise, but doing it exclusively, I think you're suggesting, Jen, diminishes something else that's crucially important, some kind of humanity that is at the core of this, right? Some kind of lived experience that's the core of this. Okay, I'm going to take Caroline just because we haven't heard from Caroline before, and I don't think I'll be able to get to you, Allison, and I'm sorry.
Okay, well, I raised some of this in the chat, but I was just thinking that there might be some flexibility in self-presentation or how someone talks with the rabbi if the rabbi has the right attitude. And to me, it seems like the fact that there are these categories and that people are not being shoehorned only into male and female creates some room. And I guess part of what I'm thinking about is, so I'm kind of gender flexible, although I don't really look like it right now, but I used to present in a much more masculine way, and I was younger and thinner, and people would actually just see me and think I was a boy when I was like 20 years old, which is a long time ago now. But I had there's a lot about how you present yourself, and I just wonder if these categories open the door, if you had a sympathetic rabbi first when they were interviewing someone and making their decision, maybe if they were like, who knows, I don't know how it went, but let's say they're having a conversation, they might have made their own judgments a little bit about, well, which of these categories works best for you? Should we, squeeze you into male, or would you be better in androgynous? Or, I don't know if this is the case, but it just opens the door. And I think that the fact that there are these categories where the rabbis are willing to say, we just don't know, that somewhat exposes that the binary system is not 100% binary, because you could just say, you have to leave, or you could just say, we're calling you a man or we're calling you a woman. We're not going to acknowledge that we don't really know.
Yeah.
So I can't say that I understand all of the rabbinical thought. Like there could have been things about you don't want someone to miss a mitzvot, or you don't want someone to be unsafe, or all these other things. But it just opens the door for a lot of things.
Thanks for that, Caroline. And maybe I'll end just by turning your reflection into a blessing. That's what I hope we're doing with this learning. May this learning help us open the doors of our minds, of our consciousness, of our perception, to sort of, that's, I think, part of why we look at these texts, and because they are different ways of thinking, and they are different ways of thinking because they're at a different period in a long conversation of searching, of trying to figure out, and that can get too abstract. But there is something good and important about that posture of asking questions and rethinking things. And when the sages do have wisdom, I take that wisdom. But we are engaged in this same search. So sometimes we will see these texts and we'll not be able, there are pieces of it that will not make sense. We'll not be able to take them into the future. But if we can take some of that openness, some of that rethinking into our own ways of moving through the world, and into our own current conversation, then maybe we can move a little bit closer to true divine wisdom, which after all is, a movement towards that oneness. Okay, thank you all. Thanks for those who stayed late. I know we're over time, but I just wanted to give this conversation its fullness. I really appreciate having this community to learn with. I will see you next week. And next week's class I'm devoting to the memory of my father. It'll be a Yortzeit I'm celebrating. So I'll see you all next week, and have a wonderful week, you all.